Android updates used to be really simple. One big launch each year in October, coinciding with the newest Pixel launch. Last year though, things got more complicated. Now, there are 2 Android releases each year, and neither of them necessarily matches a Pixel launch. Of course, there are also betas, quarterly platform releases, Canary launches, AOSP source code drops. It's a lot, and it's a mess. So today, I'm going to go over everything you need to know about how Android is tested, launched, and updated. Let's start from the top with how major Android launches happen now. So, in 2026, the new version of Android will be Android 17. Although Google doesn't use dessert code names publicly anymore, we know the internal code name is Cinnamon Bun. Based on what Google has told us about its new Android launch strategy and what happened last year with the launch of Android 16, we expect the first Android 17 launch to happen in June 2026. This first launch of the operating system will be the big one. It will have all the major SDK updates included. This means that developers who make Android apps and games will have everything they need to adapt their apps to Android 17 with this large release. This will include the ability to tap into new Android features that come with the launch. One thing we've seen already is a new contacts picker, so that could potentially be included. Along with this first launch of Android 17, we also expect Google to release the newest AOSP source code drop. AOSP stands for Android Open Source Project, which is where Google puts the raw versions of Android so people can do whatever they want with it. This is an important part of the release cycle because it allows your favorite custom ROM developers to start creating new versions based on Android 17. So that's all expected to start happening in June. But we also expect there to be a second, smaller release that comes late in the year, probably sometime in December 2026. Confusingly, this will also be called Android 17. The purpose of this release is to bring new APIs and capabilities to Android without needing to wait for Android 18, which will likely launch 6 months later in June 2027. Basically, things in the software development world move a lot faster than they used to, so this second Android 17 release allows Google to keep things fresh without forcing everyone to wait a full year between launches. Consequently, this also includes a new AOSP source code drop. The thing that confuses me the most about this strategy is that Google doesn't change the name of the release. Shouldn't it be Android 17.1 or something like that? I get that it's just a refresh of Android 17 and not a full release, but it absolutely will be different from the one we expect to see first in June. So shouldn't we call it something else? I don't know what Google is thinking here, but oh well. Android developers and people who already understand how this complicated mess of a strategy works are probably already in the comments now saying that the second version of Android 17 does have a different name, which is Android 17 QPR2. This is true, but it's still a weird strategy since none of the other QPR launches will have new APIs. Anyway, you're probably wondering what a QPR is. QPR stands for Quarterly Platform Release. As the name suggests, these releases come quarterly and allow Google to do a few things, namely make minor maintenance tweaks to Android, fix bugs, and bring in new features that are exclusive to Pixel phones. Because these happen quarterly, they allow Google to move very fast. However, Google can't add major SDK or API updates to these each quarter because that would be too much for developers to keep up with. So the numbering of QPR releases is a bit confusing. To help explain this, let's first look at how things went for Android 16. First, the main Android 16 launch happened in June, which is the end of the second quarter of the year. In September, which is the end of the following quarter, we saw Android 16 QPR1. This is the first quarterly platform release of Android 16, so it has a 1 attached to it, even though it's happening in the third quarter of the year. In the fourth quarter, specifically in December, Android 16 QPR2 launched. This was the second version of the main Android 16 launch, the one I think should have been called Android 16.1. Once again, this is slightly confusing because Android 16 QPR2 landed in the fourth quarter of the year. Notably, this is the most recent version of Android 16 as of publishing this video. Later this year, likely in March, we'll see Android 16 QPR 3, which will be the final major launch of Android 16. Then, in June 2026, we'll see the big main launch of Android 17. At that point, the cycle repeats itself. Okay, so those are how the significant stable versions of Android work. But you'll notice that I haven't talked about betas yet, nor have I talked about the new Canary line of updates. Now that you understand how the stable system works, beta and Canary launches will make a lot more sense. All right, so remember how I said that right now we are on Android 16 QPR 2, and we expect Android 16 QPR 3 to land sometime in March. Well, the between zone of those two launches is filled with beta launches. These beta launches are named for the next stable launch. In other words, if you were to install a beta on your phone right now, it would be an Android 16 QPR 3 beta because QPR 3 is the one coming up next. Each QPR beta has multiple releases, which are signified by a number at the very end of the name. For Android 16 as it is right now, we saw Android 16 QPR 3 Beta 1 launch in December 2025. So it's Android 16 because that's the most recent version of Android, QPR 3 because that's the next version of Android coming up, and then Beta 1 because it's the first beta of that QPR. Since the launch of Android QPR 3 Beta 1, we've seen two others, Android 16 QPR 3 Beta 1.1 and Android 16 QPR 3 Beta 2. Google could release many more beta versions if it wants to. There's no real limit to how many it can do. The important thing is that once the stable version of Android 16 QPR 3 lands, the following beta, the next beta launch after QPR 3, will be Android 17 Beta 1, because Android 17 will be the next major release. In the past, when the major singular Android release would land in October, we'd see the first beta of the next Android launch land in May at Google I/O. However, now that Google has pushed the launch to be much earlier in June, that's not happening anymore. Anyway, as with the QPR numbering, once Android 17 Beta 1 lands in March, the cycle will repeat itself. We'll probably see Android 17 QPR 1 beta start in June, and then QPR 2 beta start in September, and so on. One important thing I want to note is that beta releases are betas for a reason. These launches are, by their very nature, unstable and fraught with issues. You should definitely not be using these versions on your main device, as you never know what problems you could face. For example, contactless payments through Google Wallet are often impacted by beta software, leaving you unable to use this feature of your phone until Google patches the issue. So yeah, don't use beta releases on your primary phone unless you're ready to take those risks. Speaking of taking risk, now let's talk about Canary launches. These are actually a relatively new thing. Google has historically done Canary launches for other products, like Chrome, for example, but it only started doing them for Android in July 2025. Before then, Google referred to these pre-beta betas as developer previews because they were specifically designed for developers, not the general public. Now they are called Canary launches, but the intention is the same. These are for developers only and definitely should never be used on a person's main daily driver. Canary launches come about once a month. They don't have the Android version number in them, meaning there are no Android 16 Canaries or Android 17 Canaries. Instead, there are 4 numbers at the end of release that signify the year and month of the release. The most recent Canary launch as of this video publishing is Android Canary 2601, the Canary launch from the first month of 2026. I have just a few quick things left to touch on, which are security patches, pixel drops, and Android feature drops. Security patches are just that, patches for the most recent stable version of Android. Patches do not include any major updates to Android itself. They just fix bugs and security flaws present in the latest version. These come out monthly, although there have been a few times we've seen more than one land in 1 month. Pixel drops and Android feature drops usually coincide with the latest stable QPR. Pixel drops are features specific to Pixel phones, smartwatches, and the Pixel tablet. Android feature drops are typically new feature updates for significant Google apps like Messages, Maps, and Photos, and sometimes include new operating system features too. These are things that go out to every Android phone and tablet. Usually, Pixel drops and Android feature drops happen at the same time, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they land with a new QPR, but sometimes they don't. There's no real saying when they are going to happen, as Google plays it all very close to their chest. Anyway, that's everything you need to know about the modern way Android is released. Yes, it is very, very confusing. Part of my job is understanding how this all works, and even I can't remember it half the time, so don't feel bad if you're still confused. Hopefully, though, you have a better understanding of it all and can make more informed decisions about which version of Android you should use and what each version means when you see it discussed on sites like Android Authority. Thanks so much for watching, and if you want to learn more about this, I've left a link in the description for a very helpful article going over everything, which includes some helpful charts. Give it a look if you like. Don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there, and I'll see you all later.